after I retired, as you probably can tell, I am not a couch potato. I can't just sit around. So I always loved history. Since I was a little tiny kid, I would read history. So I started doing history lectures in the area of the Civil War. And then, as my wife tells me, it kind of got out of hand. So now I have, for the last, I started doing this before I retired, but for the last at least 20 years, I've been doing lectures, and now I do Civil War, Revolutionary War, World War II, and then anything else that kind of pops into my head. And I love doing research. I love doing reading. I like to go on the internet and find things, and you never know what you find. I mean, I'm working on a new program right now, which is called Histories and Mysteries of Colonial America. All the interesting thing about colonial America that they don't teach you. You know, so it's fun for me. So that's my boring. I've traveled a lot. My wife and I have been very blessed that we've been able to travel. I've traveled, you know how they call it, the bucket list? You know, it's done. And I'm blessed for that, you know, that we've been able to do a lot of traveling. And now I think probably the reason I made the mistake is, to be honest with you, because of the American Revolution, and I'm one of the few people that even understand it and can teach it. I wound up working more than I want to. Been really a lot of people asking for Revolutionary War, different programs and different areas. So that's what we'll be doing here. But so that's it. Not exciting, is it? But I've loved it. It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. I had a challenging job, and then I started doing something I loved, and able to travel in between. So it's been nice. So here we are. And just going back a little bit, we've talked about this a little bit before. And again, we were good British citizens. This whole idea of independence sort of came out of the blue. We had a 200-year history, which we've discussed before, as good British citizens. And the other thing is that you have to remember, what makes the revolution so amazing is that these were 13 independent colonies. This was not the United Colonies of England or anything like that. They were like 13 little countries. And each one had their own legislature, their own laws. They even printed their own money. So this was all disparate little 13 colonies. And the fact they were able to come together as a country, to me, is quite amazing, because it started so differently. Again, and just a little background, it goes back to what was known as the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War. And it started with this gentleman, Governor Robert Dinwiddie, in Virginia. And what they wanted, everybody wanted to control the Ohio Valley. And that's western Pennsylvania into Ohio, because it's so fertile. The land is so fertile. And this is where the frontier was. So they sent a guy named George Washington out there. Now, as a youngster, when he was in his 20s, he actually was a member of the British Army, the British colonial army here in the colonies. So he actually got into the first battle. He got into a battle with the French. He came back, and then they sent the first British regiments over here in 1755. So George Washington fired the first shot of what became the French and Indian War. And that eventually led to us looking for our independence. Now, the war lasted for 7 years. It was actually a world war. It was fought in Europe as well, as the French and the British fought it out. The Dutch got involved, the Spanish got involved, the Prussians got involved. And eventually, the war ends after 7 years in 1763, and the French are expelled from North America. And it's now the British and the Spanish that control this region. Well, what happened after the war? Well, it turned out that Prime Minister George Grenville said, hey, you know what? This war cost us a fortune. We're in debt. So what can we do? So they decided the best thing to do is, for the first time, let's tax the colonies. And we'll make the colonies pay for their own defense. So remember, this had never been done before. There was an economic movement between the colonies and Great Britain, but each colony was independent. Each colony taxed themselves whatever was needed, and for the first time they said, let's tax the colonies. Sounded like a great idea, didn't it? So in 1764 they passed something called the Sugar Act. And as soon as that was passed, that was in 1764, then almost immediately people got upset. Not so much at the fact that there was a tax, but that Parliament did it without consulting anybody in the colonies. They just imposed it. And the question is, did Parliament have the right to impose direct taxes on the colonies? Or was this reserved to the colonial legislatures? So then we got a whole series of taxes: the Sugar Act, the Currency Act, the Quartering Act, and the worst was the Stamp Act. That was the one that really got people upset. Going back for just a minute, the Stamp Act was really, they said, no matter what you buy in terms of anything, you're going to have to pay a tax on it. It was like a giant sales tax. So if you bought a deck of cards, you had to buy a stamp. If you got a legal document, you had to buy a stamp. If you got a newspaper, you had to get a stamp. No matter what you purchased, it had to have a British tax stamp on it. And this really infuriated everybody, from the very wealthy down to the poorest person. Nobody would like that. So they started repealing a few of those taxes, and then they came up with another idea. They had a new Chancellor of the Exchequer. This is the Secretary of the Treasury in England. And his name was Charles Townshend. So he figured, well, we'll do one better. So they imposed new taxes on paper, lead. They established a customs board. They set up courts. And they gave British officials the right to search your house. People were livid. Angry, you can't even imagine. People would not stand for this. And the whole idea was not about the tax itself, but it was the principle that Parliament was enforcing all these laws and these taxes, and the colonies had no representation in Parliament. None. Parliament did it, they sent it over, and the customs officials enforced it. Well, the king sensed the turmoil. And this all started in Massachusetts. Now, the other colonies were angry, but the biggest rebellion started in Massachusetts. So the first thing the king said is, well, let's put this down. And they sent 4,000 British regulars. Now, you have to remember the British regulars at that time. This was the most formidable army in the world. And, if you've ever seen them, if you see a reenactment or something, the beautiful uniforms, and they're red. And the red goes back really centuries. It's kind of just evolved into the red uniform. And they're just amazing to see these guys marching. So they sent 4,000 regulars to Boston. There were 16,000 inhabitants. Can you imagine this? One soldier for every 4,000 residents. 4,000 soldiers, so it's 1 to 4. So they were all over the place. And now people got angry and they said, well, the British are not here to defend us, but they're here to pacify us. And this was inconceivable. They could not grasp this idea. So Samuel Adams, now he's the guy who starts this mess. George Washington fires the first shot of the French and Indian War. And as a result of that, of course, the British win, and then they tax the colonies. So Sam Adams is angry about the whole thing. So he writes something called the Massachusetts Circular Letter in 1768. Now, I have to explain this to you. This is not a letter. This is about 8 pages long. And it's all the things that aggravates him. And he sends this off to Parliament. And the main thing is we're being taxed without our representation. So now what happens, and here's a little, as you can see, I put 1 page up there for you. Imposing duties on the people of this province with the sole and express purpose of raising revenue are infringements on our natural and constitutional rights. Now, I did bring something with me. Let me grab it quick. Okay, this is the Constitution of Great Britain. Still today. Now, you'll notice it's a little different than ours. What they do, they don't have one document. They don't have one constitution. It starts with the Magna Carta, which is British laws imposed on King John. And then after that, all the different rules, regulations, different things that they created, they put it together. And it's called the 1,000-Year Constitution. So these are the rules that you had to follow. And Sam Adams said, this is what you're doing. In the Constitution, it violates all these provisions. We have the right to be represented, we have the right to be heard, and Parliament's violating our basic rights as Englishmen. So then he started a secret organization called the Sons of Liberty. And by the way, there were also Daughters of Liberty, which, as Heather said, I will talk about when I talk about the founding mothers. A lot of people, they don't teach that. There were 2.5 million people in the colonies. Guess what? Half of them were women. Yeah, and they did stuff. They did great, interesting things. So I will be talking about them in the future, I promise you. But he started this secret organization called Sons of Liberty. And these were the first men who started talking about, to some degree, an idea of some independence from England, at least in the law. And some of the original ones are very interesting. Obviously, Paul Revere, Haym Solomon, Benjamin Rush, Charles Thompson, very important man. He was secretary to the Continental Congress, and Sam Adams, and a guy named Benedict Arnold. And in the future, I'll be telling you about Benedict Arnold, the fascinating story, how he went from America's greatest hero to America's most villainous traitor. It's quite a story. Well, the group still saw themselves as British subjects, but they were really angry. So they went to the customs house and the home of the governor, and they torched them and stole everything. They looted the houses of the customs officer. So then they started coming up with ways to protest. And the first one, have you ever heard of the Liberty Tree? They would make speeches under a tree in the town center. Well, if there wasn't an available tree, they put up a pole, which was called the Liberty Pole. And they would make speeches under that. Then in the French Revolution, the French wore a red hat, and they came up then with the Liberty hat. Now, the Liberty cap actually stays in American history. On the left is the symbol of Columbia, which is the early symbol of America. And then on our old coins, if you look at our coins, you will see the Columbia is wearing a Liberty hat, or a Liberty cap, if you will. It's also in still today, the official seal of the United States Department of the Army has a Liberty cap. Now, they started erecting these poles, and these were all over, not just small towns, but big cities, Philadelphia, New York. And in New York, they put up the Liberty pole. There was no tree in the center. So what happened? The British chopped it down. So they put up another one, and the British chopped it down. And they put up another one, and the soldiers chopped it down. So finally they said, yeah, good, fine. So they took a pole, banded it in iron. They had one of the blacksmiths make an iron band, and they banded it with iron. So the British came by and put explosives and blew it up. Now this aggravated them. Now notice how early this is. This is 1770, January 1770. So this is pretty early, and you can see now people are doing an uprising way before they teach you in school. It starts in 1770. And the British soldiers used their bayonets, but the officers came up and they maintained order, and the people were pushed back. Well, then again, they started putting up a new liberty pole. And again, the British garrison comes out, they arrived, the crowd starts growing in numbers, and they start throwing things at the British soldiers. Now, you've all heard of the Boston Massacre. This is before that. And again, you know, it's things that we don't teach about. But one of the cries was to the British soldiers, draw your bayonets, cut your way through. And they did. They actually stabbed some of the people. Now, nobody died. The officers arrived, they maintained control, but there was a battle. There was like the townspeople throwing bricks, and the officers and the soldiers sticking their bayonets out. It was really a very bad situation. So this was called the Encounter at Golden Hill. It's the first blood of the American Revolution. It's the first time American citizens and British soldiers, or I should say British colonists and British soldiers, fought. Now today it's right about 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. You can only imagine there's nothing there. It's Manhattan. But that's where it first occurs. The Boston Massacre, as they call it, is 6 weeks later. Now, in between February of 1770, the first death. They're protesting outside the house of a customs officer. And he takes his musket, and again, it's a huge crowd. He sticks his musket out the window to scare everybody and pulls the trigger. He kills an 11-year-old boy named Christopher Sider. That's the first death of the American Revolution. Again, something for whatever reason we do not teach. Christopher Sider's grave is in Boston at the same mass grave site as those killed in the Boston Massacre. He was 11 years old. It's not Snyder, it's Sider. It was spelled wrong on the memorial. It's S-E-I-D-E-R. But Christopher Sider, 11 years old, was the first person killed in 1770, which becomes the American Revolution. Now, until after World War II, we never had a large standing army. People said an army was the greatest danger to our individual liberties. And the constant British Army was an aggravation to everybody. And that then creates, in March of 1770, the Boston Massacre. It was cold, it was snowing, and there was one soldier standing outside the customs house. You know how you have to stand guard duty? And it's freezing cold. And a couple of people come by, and they hated these guys. So they started throwing snowballs at him, cursing at him, yelling at him, just picking up pieces of snow, walk by, boom. And, he's getting aggravated. So eventually they start really making ice balls and then firing these ice balls at this poor guy. So he calls for help. And the patrol comes out, and they surround him. And again, they have muskets. Now, what I will do in the future, I'll bring along. I have I couldn't bring it today. I have a Brown Bess, an original one. So I'll bring a musket with me. I'll show you what they look like. But a Brown Bess is 5 feet long, and the bayonet's 17 inches. So the thing's this long. It's quite an interesting weapon. And I promise I will bring it. And what happened is they then surround him with these, muskets and bayonets, and then people there start ringing the bells of the town in Boston. Now, the bells ringing means it's a fire. So everybody starts running out of their homes thinking there's something burning, because obviously that's horrible. And they see this crowd, they run to the crowd, they see the soldiers, and it gets worse. More snowballs, ice balls, shouting, insults, and finally, somebody, we do not know who. It's just like the Battle of Lexington. Somebody yelled, "Fire!" And the British let go a volley. Again, there weren't that many British soldiers, but it was enough to kill a number of people. 5 were killed and 6 were wounded. The engraving is the first engraving of the Boston Massacre done by Paul Revere. He was a very excellent artist. The soldiers then were put on trial, because in those days you're not supposed to shoot at the populace. And they were put on trial. They were defended by John Adams, who said that everyone deserves a defense. 2 of them were convicted, and they were branded on their thumbs, which was the British punishment in those days. So, in the grave there, and the first African American to die was Crispus Attucks, a former slave who was in the crowd that night, who was the first African American to die. And these are the men, and they're buried in Boston's Granary Memorial Cemetery. So now the next incident, 1772, goes around, and there's a British ship called the Gaspé. And it's up in New England, and it's going up and down the rivers, and they're grabbing merchant ships and taking the products off the merchant ships. And they were impounding them. And this was directly aimed at the Sons of Liberty in that area. So what happens? The Sons of Liberty one night climbed onto the ship, forced the crew off, and burned it to the ground. It's called the Gaspé Incident. Today, it's on that area of Massachusetts, it's called Gaspé Point. Of course, the British Crown was furious. The British soldiers ran around. Who did it? Point them out. I didn't do it. Point them out. And everybody goes, what? What? Who? I didn't see anything. No one was ever arrested or tried or anything. There was no cooperation. The ship was burned to the ground. So then they repealed the Townshend Acts, and then they came out with the worst one called the Tea Act. And the Tea Act, it wasn't so much the taxes. What they were mad about was the monopoly. Because this tea was the second best drink, the second most popular drink. You guys all know. What was the first? Oh, come on, you know. Who said it? Say it louder. Beer. Yes, beer was the most popular. Tea was the second. And what happened was the Crown said, you can only buy your tea from the East India Tea Company. And they cut off supplies of all other tea. And it wasn't so much the tax, but the precedent of subjugating you to future impositions equally unjust. Now, there were tea parties everywhere. It wasn't just Boston. There was a tea party in Philadelphia, there was one in New York, they were in Charleston, and basically they didn't destroy the tea. When the ship came up, they barricaded the harbor and said, you can't unload it, take it back. Only in Boston did they disguise themselves as, quote, Indians, and then climb on the ship, and they dumped 10,000 pounds sterling of tea into the Boston harbor. And today, I can't imagine, maybe that's a couple $100,000 worth of tea. and they dumped it into the harbor. That's what made it so interesting. So it was one of many actions in the colonies, and they started boycotting British tea. And I found an interesting story, because there's a little town in North Carolina called Edenton. And Penelope Barker said, I'm going to organize the women. And we're going to have our own tea party. We're going to boycott British goods. And there you can see a memorial marker for the Edenton Tea Party. This is one of the earliest political actions by women. And there's a wonderful memorial in that spot in town. Isn't that great? A little teapot? That was made of brass, so it was originally shiny, but it's, oxidized over the years. And she wrote this big thing, I won't read this, but basically it said, American ladies, follow the laudable example of your husband. Oppose what is being forced upon us. So again, women did as much as the men. Well, George III and Parliament were furious. They put in more draconian laws. And then they put out the coercive acts. Here in the colonies, we called them the intolerable acts. And this was really ugly. And one of the worst, the one that people really, they said, from now on, you are responsible for quartering any English soldiers. So we can march them up to your house and make you take care of them and have their bedrooms there and feed them and clothe them and get them whatever they need. And the worst part, you got to do their laundry. Now, the Quartering Act really got people angry. I mean, all these other things were bad, but being forced to take soldiers into your home and maintain them. So again, this is the port bill. They blockaded the port of Boston. These other acts that I mentioned, the Quartering Act was the one that really aggravated everybody to no end. So, as a result of these intolerable acts, the First Continental Congress was called in Philadelphia, and they met at Carpenter's Hall. So now, look what the British have done. The Parliament and the King. We had 13 colonies, right? All of them independent. They didn't really cooperate with each other that much. And all of a sudden, because of all these onerous things, they all came together. And it happened in Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. So they met from September 5th to October 25th. And they adopted a whole series of resolutions, the Declaration of Resolves. Now, again, this is pages and pages. And what they said was, we are Englishmen, these are the colonies, and we have rights. Parliament, you cannot just take away our rights. And here's one that I put in here, and this is pages of stuff, but this is our ancestors who first settled these colonies were at the time of their emigration from the mother country entitled to all rights, liberties, and immunities of free and natural born subjects within the realm of England. So they came up with three basic resolutions. One, boycotting British goods. Send discourses, meaning appeals, to both the citizens and the king, and send a petition to the Parliament. And they said, we'll reconvene on May 10th, 1775. This is something, and you know what, ladies and gentlemen? This is something, for some reason, we don't teach this in school. But Patrick Henry, you remember him? Give me liberty or give me death guy? This is what he says at the First Continental Congress. This sets the tone. The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian. I am an American. That is, to me, that is earth-shattering. It's the first time any member of Congress or any member of the colonies said, I'm not a Pennsylvanian anymore, I'm an American. To me, that is the most important speech. We don't teach that. Have any of you ever heard this before? Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, that we don't teach this? And that's critical. Patrick, give me liberty or give me death. We've all heard that one. But how about I am an American? It's the first time somebody ever said that. Well, King George got the petition, by the way. It's called the Olive Branch Petition. You know what he did with it? Is there a trash can in here? Went right in the trash. And he said, I'm certain that any other conduct but compelling obedience would be ruinous. Therefore, no consideration could bring me to swerve from the present path, which I think myself duty bound to follow. I'm not changing what I'm doing. So March 23rd, 1775, the House of Burgesses in Virginia, they come together. And this is where he makes that famous speech. So it wasn't in Congress. It was in the House of Burgesses in Virginia. They have a debate. Now, George Washington is there. Patrick Henry is there. Thomas Jefferson is there. All the famous Virginians. And this is when he says, forbid it, Almighty God, I know not what course others may take, but for me, give me liberty or give me death. And I understand how important that is. But I think the other statement he made in Congress is really critical to what goes on. Now, the king then went to General Gage. He was, they got rid of the governor and they brought in a general. And they said to General Gage, a vigorous exertion of force to seize the ringleaders behind the Massachusetts protests. So now we're into 1775. Now, some in Parliament said, hey, wait a minute. We got to go all the way across the Atlantic. We just fought a war with France. It's going to be a lot of soldiers that we're going to have to send. These people will get upset. So people, and General Gage said, I don't know if this is such a good idea. So you know what they did? They fired him and brought in General Sir William Howe. So Gage sends out patrols, and he starts to have patrols to keep people in line in Massachusetts. And I think you all know what comes next. They celebrated, they had their secret council, the secret Massachusetts Provisional Congress. They were meeting illegally because the Intolerable Act said you can't do that anymore. And the king declared the colony of Massachusetts in open rebellion. And he said, do whatever you have to do to General Gage. Arrest him or kill him. I don't care. Do what you need to do. That's quite an order, isn't it? So we again faced the best army in the world. Now, everybody knew that espionage, and we're going to talk about this in the future. I think all of you know this. I love spies. I think spies are cool. I just love spies. So espionage was really important. And espionage ignites the war. Now, why? Excuse me 1 second. Pardon me. So General Gage figures that I'm going to send some people to the different towns in New England. And the one thing also that we don't teach, when we teach the American Revolution, we teach that everybody in America got up and opposed the king, and that's not true. I mentioned to you before, the way historians look at it, 1/3 of the people were patriots. The British called us rebels. 1/3 were loyalists, remained loyal to the king at all times. And 1/3 were in the middle going, I don't know, let's see who wins. And it literally broke down that way. And this resolved in double-crossing, double agents, and espionage. Now, the Loyalists were stocking weapons all over the place. They had secret weapon stashes all over Massachusetts. And what Gage did, he sent some men to Concord, just in sort of brown coats and neckerchiefs, like that picture there. Now, the problem is, any of you come from a real small community, a real small town? You knew everybody, didn't you? Pretty much. You knew everybody. Well, in Concord, it was like that. There were only a couple hundred people. They knew everybody. And here these two strangers appear, and they go to the tavern. Didn't take 5 minutes. Everybody knew they were spies. And they met with a loyalist who told them that there are arms being hidden here, and gunpowder and bullets and so forth. So they went back and repeated that to General Gage. Now, the difference between Concord and Philadelphia is a big city. 35,000 people at that time living in Philadelphia, and strangers doing commerce were coming in all the time. So it's harder to find a spy. But you go to a little town, you know right away, that guy don't belong here. So, based on this intelligence, on April 19th, 1775, General Gage sends 700 British soldiers to arrest John Adams, arrest John Hancock, go to Concord, get the arms, destroy everything, and we'll put an end to the rebellion. Now, the guy who learns about this is one of our founding fathers. His name is Dr. Joseph Warren. He's the youngest of the founding fathers. He was 22 years old. Tragically, he dies at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Otherwise, he'd be up in the pantheon of founding fathers. And he finds out about this. Now, what he did, he had a spy ring. And including Paul Revere and others, and they would go into the taverns, and they would sit, and they drink, and guess what they would do? Listen. And they came back and said, the British are going to come out. Now, there's another story. You're all adults, right? Yeah, can you handle this? That's the wife of General Gage, the British general. And it said that she was infatuated with Joseph Warren, and they had a little relationship. You follow that? You get it? So he was having a relationship with the wife of the British commanding general, maybe. But some people believe that's what happened. And as a result, maybe it was pillow talk. We don't know. But that's how he got the information that the British were going out that evening. And of course, they marched out from Boston to go to Lexington and then to Concord. Now, messengers, let me jump ahead here. Messengers were sent. Now, I've told you before, listen, my children, you shall hear of the midnight ride of who didn't ride, but that's okay. So Paul went out, he did ride. He was one of about 20 riders that night. William Dawes, they were given the same job. Revere and Dawes were to go to Lexington, and then if you could, go on to Concord. And of course, the poem was written. And Longfellow wrote, it's a wonderful story of patriotism, and it needs some creative alterations. So they made the poem. So they both rode to Lexington. Both of them got there around the same time. They warned Adams. They warned Hancock. Then they were met by a third rider named Dr. Samuel Prescott. And the three of them started riding off together towards Concord. Again, there were many, many riders out that night. They didn't get far when they were grabbed by a British patrol. Prescott spurred his horse and he ran off. Dawes spurred his horse and ran off. His horse threw him, and then he was walking. Paul Revere was captured by the British. They confiscated his horse, and he, as the first shots were fired on Lexington Green, he was walking back to Boston. So it's not quite the poem. These are the soldiers they faced, the grenadiers. Do you ever see those English grenadiers with the big hats? These were the tallest soldiers with a foot-long hat. They looked like giants on the battlefield. And then surrounding them was the light infantry. So, sensing possible trouble, they sent a second group of soldiers following the first. But now something happened. That's the commander of the second group, Brigadier General Hugh Earl Percy, 2nd Duke of Northumberland. He was asleep. And when the orders came, rouse your men and get them on the road, I'm not waking them. You going to wake them? No, you're not waking them. How about, you want to wake them? No. They let the man sleep. 5 hours later, when he gets up, they said, oh, by the way, we're supposed to be on the road. And it makes a big difference. They let him sleep. They marched 5 hours too late. Well, in the morning, about 4:30, they arrive at Lexington Green. The commander, Captain Parker, he has about 77 colonial militia. And again, who are they facing? 700 British soldiers under an officer named Major John Pitcairn. Tragically, he also dies at Bunker Hill. So he rides up and he says, throw down your arms, ye villains, ye rebels. And he says, well, I'm only here to talk. And he says, I have nothing to say to you. He arranges his men in order. And again, we don't know who. Somebody yells, fire. And the British lose a volley. Parker's men, 8 killed and 9 wounded. Now, anybody here ever go on YouTube? Come on, somebody must. All right, if not, get your grandkids to help you. All right, because this is really cool, honestly. This is a movie in 1988 called April Morning. It's on YouTube. You can watch it, and it's on, I think, Prime Video. But Tommy Lee Jones when he's like 20. All right, but if you go on YouTube and you type in where the subject is, April Morning, Conflict on Lexington Green. It's only a 9-minute clip, but it shows you a wonderful picture of the British marching onto Lexington Green and the 77 colonials. It's not CGI. These are real people dressed in real uniforms, and it's as close as I've ever seen what the real thing looked like. It's magical. It really is. So if you can, or you have someone who can do it, go into their apartment, sit there, say, I'm coming in, just open the door. And go to YouTube, April Morning, Conflict on Lexington Green. And again, it's only 9 minutes. It's a short clip, but it is great. The British march out to the drums. I'm telling you, if I was a Continental militiaman standing there, when I saw these guys march out, I don't know what I'd run like, I mean, it's a magnificent scene. It's perfectly done. The whole movie is a soap opera. It's melodramatic. But that scene is fabulous. It's really, really, really a good scene. So if you get a chance, or, get your grandkids to help you, and really, seriously, it's really worth it. It'll be worth your 9 minutes. All right, so they go into Concord. They find a lot of bullets. They had about pounds and pounds of lead bullets. They threw them all into the creek. And after the British left, the townspeople went in and fished them all out. But, hey. They then started a fire. They burned down the Liberty Pole. Well, why not? So that caught on to the courthouse. People thought they were burning the whole town. And of course, more and more arrived. They wound up on North Bridge. The British fired at them, and the first Minuteman is killed. His name is Isaac Davis of Acton, Massachusetts. The first military death during the American Revolution. And then Emerson writes the wonderful poem called Concord Hymn. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag in April's breeze unfurled, here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. Well, the militia fire back. Fire, fellow soldiers, for God's sake, fire. And that is the beginning of the American Revolution. Now, the soldiers then start marching back to Boston. And the Minutemen and the militia that were there said, we're not letting you get away with that. So they started fighting them Indian style. Now, the British, remember, as they march out, and they're huge, in a big row. So they march back, they're in columns of 4, and they're marching with their weapons. And these guys are hiding behind buildings, in windows, behind brick walls, behind trees, and they start shooting at the British. Well, you can only imagine, the British are not used to this. As a matter of fact, you know what they called it? Ungentlemanly. You're not supposed to fight that way. You're supposed to stand in front and do a volley. Well, And they kept doing it. They were shooting up the British to the point, some of them even dropped their packs and their weapons and just started running down the road. They were not used to this. And here's a comment by one person who was there, the British. Our men had very few opportunities of getting good shots at the rebels. They hardly ever fired under cover of a stone wall, behind a tree, or out of a house. And the moment they fired, they lay down out of sight until they loaded again or the column had passed. So the soldiers were harassed all the way back to Boston. At the end, the British had 73 dead, 174 wounded, 26 missing. They ran away. About 15% of the total force. This was the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. Now, you're going to hear on TV, the war started on when? July 4th, 1776. That's not true. Don't let them sell you that. It starts April 19th, 1775 in Massachusetts at Lexington and Concord. Now, they're also going to tell you that it ended in October 1781 when Cornwallis surrenders at Yorktown. That's not true. The war goes on for another year and a half. The treaty is not signed till September 1783. The Revolutionary War is 8 years long. So just to sum up how we get there, April 19th, 1775, the actions on Lexington Green and Concord, the pursuit of the British soldiers, that's the opening shots of the American Revolutionary War. Now, what happens then? Very quickly. Boston Neck. This is General Artemus Ward. He's only a general for the beginning of the war. He then leaves and becomes a member of Congress. But he bottles up the British in Boston. It's called Boston Neck. May 10th, 1775. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, along with Benedict Arnold, capture Fort Ticonderoga from the British. The same day, the Second Continental Congress convenes in Philadelphia, May 10th, 1775. By June, they knew a war is imminent, and a man named George Washington is made commander of this new thing called the American Continental Army. Then there's the Battle of Bunker Hill, which is in June of 1775. And the British victory at Bunker Hill, they said more victories at that, we won't have enough soldiers. The colonists really gave an amazing account of themselves. Many British soldiers were killed. One casualty as a result of that, General Gage was fired. They said he wasn't strong enough. And they brought in General Sir William Howe. July 3rd, 1775, Washington arrives at Cambridge and takes charge of the army. Then they send the olive branch petition to the king, and they say, "We are your majesty's faithful subjects. We're still English. Just stop doing what you're doing." And they also passed on July 6, 1775, a declaration of causes and necessity of taking up arms. Why we need to fight. It describes actions by the British government that had angered the colonists, and they said, "We are now going to fight for our independence if we have to, if we're forced to." The majority delegates were not seeking independence. But look, you know who signed that petition? The same guys that signed the Declaration of Independence. Same people. Again, the king threw it away, and he issued a proclamation of rebellion. And he said, "I'm sending soldiers, more of them." So in October 1775, he gave a speech to Parliament. "It is now the part of wisdom and of clemency to put a speedy end to these disorders by the most decisive exertions. For this purpose, I've increased my naval establishment and greatly augmented my land forces. I'm going to put it down by force of arms." Well, then General, he was a colonel then, Henry Knox, goes to Fort Ticonderoga. He gets the cannons. This is amazing. And he drags them 300 miles through the snow to Boston. And today that route is marked. There's historical markers. Can you imagine 300 miles from Fort Ticonderoga in New York all the way to Boston by hand? Now the cannons are ringing Boston, and the British leave Boston. The same time, the famous Thomas Paine writes the first of the famous missives called Common Sense, where it's 47 pages urging people to fight for independence. And again, you know, it's it's 47 pages. What you don't get taught is the British responded. The Loyalists published their own pamphlet called Plain Truth, which said, this is ridiculous. The British evacuate Boston in March of 1776. The Continental Congress on July 2nd votes to declare independence. But notice the date, right? July 2nd, 1776. On July 2nd, Congress says, "Resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. They're absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved." July 2nd, that same day, 30,000 British soldiers arrive in New York. And that is another story. So between August 1776 and November, there's a fighting in New York. The Continentals are forced out into Pennsylvania. The army is dispirited, demoralized, and the next story is Washington's crossing. So, I hope you found it interesting. I tried to get you, it's a lot in an hour, to try to get you from one point to the point of the revolution. Just let me ask you, anybody have any questions? Anything I can answer for you? Anything that you have a question about? I'd be more than happy to answer. I dulled you completely, right? I hope you found it interesting, and I appreciate sorry about the time. I will make sure I get it right next time. So thank you all for coming down. I really appreciate it. I know this is a lot, but, I hope you found it interesting. Thank you.